Part 10. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 91. At this moment, the old beggar actually lay directly on the ground, and then glanced at them casually, with a somewhat playful smile on the corner of his mouth. Actually, you don't have to take me so seriously. I'm just giving you some advice. You don't have to listen to me. It's actually nothing. At this time, after the old beggar finished speaking, a somewhat playful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and a trace of amusement flashed in his eyes. Master Zi-Ling and the great elder heard this. After the old beggar finished speaking, a bit of excitement flashed in his eyes. At this time, they glanced at Lin Yu fiercely. That killing intent was quietly released. Boy, things have come to this, and even the people who support you don't help you anymore. Now I see what you are going to do. The great elder suddenly took a step forward, a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes, and the cold aura on his body was displayed without reservation. And at this moment, Master Zi-Ling was even more ready to make a move, but for some reason, the three-clawed king dragon was still unwilling to help him at this moment. A bit of confusion flashed through Master Zi-Ling's eyes. Then he couldn't help but frown slightly. Why? Why are you still unwilling to help me? Hasn't that guy already said that he won't bother with this matter anymore? At this time, the eyes of the three-clawed king dragon flashed with a bit of strange brilliance, and the corner of his mouth also evoked a trace of sneer. There was even a bit of contempt in his eyes. At this time, the three-clawed king dragon, seeing Master Zi-Ling like this, it was like looking at an idiot. It's really ridiculous when you say it. I really don't know how to evaluate you. In fact, when you talk about it in detail, it's not what you think. If people say they won't help, that's just give us a step down. Of course, the most important thing may be that he can't get that old face to help, but this doesn't mean that if you really want to kill this little guy, he will not help. At this time, 3 black lines appeared on Master Zi-Ling's forehead, and he was speechless for a while. He never thought that he would be taught so much about the world of humanity by his strange beast today. Master Zi-Ling half squinted his eyes, with some complicated colors in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. Then tell me, what should we do now? It's very simple. This matter couldn't be simpler. He wants the Beiming bear. Just give him the Beiming bear. If you give him the Beiming bear, there is no need to go to such trouble. 3 black lines appeared on Master Zi-Ling's forehead, and he was speechless for a while, but even he had to admit that what this guy said was true. At this moment, Master Zi-Ling's eyes narrowed to a slit, and some complex colors flashed through his eyes, and then he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. But if that's the case, wouldn't it be too embarrassing? Don't forget, those guys from the Wuji sect should be here soon. If so, if your father's generation is attacked by then, the strength of the Wuji sect is already equal to yours. By then, your troubles will be even greater, so compared to this in terms of loss and face, do you think it's important? The three-clawed king dragon began to analyze these things for Genren Zi-Ling in a leisurely manner. At this moment, some complicated colors flashed in the eyes of the three-clawed king dragon. At this time, the three-clawed king dragon just smiled like this, with a bit of playful light flashing in his eyes, and then a playful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Even I have to admit that some things are not as simple as you think. There are many things, and you can't handle them so easily, but you have to know how to make some choices. The three-clawed king dragon said this unhurriedly, and at this time, after hearing what the three-clawed king dragon said, a strange color flashed in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but feel like this. He raised his eyebrows slightly. At this time, Zi-Ling's eyes were fascinated, and then he sighed faintly. Well, some things cannot be explained or explained, let alone cannot be explained. Everything is not that easy, so this time, there are some things that cannot be said and cannot be said. Master Zi Ling was talking unhurriedly, but at this time, the three-clawed king dragon just smiled like this. Think about it, is it the TNG sect that is more important, or the face, and the Beiming bear? Think about it for yourself. After hearing what the three-clawed king dragon said, Master Zi Ling's eyes evoked some strange colors, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. He took a deep breath and sighed slightly. Calm down your mood. Interesting, I think you are becoming more and more interesting now, but sometimes there are some things that I can't explain. How do you say this? Have you never thought about what would happen if that boy helped the Wiji sect to fight with me? At this time, the three-clawed king dragon half squinted his eyes, and a playful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. At this moment, he seemed to have suddenly remembered something. This is also very simple. Who said you must give it to him now? After hearing what the three-clawed dragon said, Zi Ling Genren's eyes flashed with confusion, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly, and a strange color flashed in his eyes. What do you mean by this? Why don't I understand it? Zi Ling Genren's eyes flashed with a strange color. At this time, he was like a monk who was confused and had no idea what the three-clawed dragon meant. You can agree to him first. As long as he helps us repel the Wiji sect, then this Beiming bear will be given to him as a thank you gift. I believe he will not refuse. This three-clawed dragon seems to be no ordinary person. He knows these political tactics very well. Even Zi Ling Genren couldn't help but feel a little admiration in his heart after hearing what the three-clawed dragon said. At this time, Zi Ling Genren nodded slightly. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 92. When Master Zi Ling finished talking to the three-clawed king dragon, a bit of excitement flashed in his eyes, and he nodded slightly at the end. Boy, don't blame our huge sect for bullying you. I can give you this Beiming bear, but only if you contribute some strength to my section, that's alright. After hearing what Master Zi Ling said, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with something strange, and then he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. At this moment, Lin Yu glanced at Master Zi Ling, and then half squinted his eyes like this. If you want me to do something, just say it, don't hide it here, it's not interesting. It's very simple. I can indeed give you the Beiming bear, but when the Wiji sect comes to trouble us later, you should put in some effort. Old senior, what you said is right. The old beggar on the side untied the wine bottle from his waist, and then began to drink heavily. It is indeed a good thing to use people's money to eliminate disasters for others. Over the years, the Wiji sect has been annexing the surrounding gangs and has done a lot of robbery. Alas, it is simply a crime. If the Wiji sect annexes the TNG sect, I am afraid that the people will not be able to survive by then. Thinking about that scene, it makes people feel a little shuddering. After the old beggar said this, a bit of helplessness flashed in his eyes, and a wry smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. At this time, he could not help but shake his head slightly. The leader of the TNG sect nodded lightly. Compared with their Wiji sect, our TNG sect is much better, so after the young hero helped us like this, he didn't do anything that violated the principles. At this moment, Lin Yu's eyes narrowed to a slit, and then at this moment, his brain was spinning rapidly and he began to think about whether what the guy in front of him said was true or false. At this time, several heads were thrown over. Those heads looked quite honest, and their heads' carves were exactly like the hair of ordinary people. This is in this world of alien beasts. The lowest people among them are also the most looked down upon by some monks. The minds of some powerful monks have reached a twisted level, so they don't regard this human life as human life at all, they completely regard this human life as trivial, and then a strong man suddenly jumped out like this. The strong man's skills were followed by millions of wolves. These wolves were so majestic. Although they were only at the 5th or 6th level of the intermediate level, as the saying goes, it was difficult to defeat a pack of wolves with just one hand. After Lin Yu saw this fat guy, his first impression was that he had the urge to kill him. At this time, Lin Yu suppressed the anger in his heart and tried his best to calm himself down. So calm down a bit. A sarcastic smile appeared on the corner of Lin Yu's mouth, and a cold look flashed in his eyes, and the murderous intention of Yugo in his body was vaguely displayed. Asshole, you are so careless about human life and treat human life like dirt. If I don't kill you, I will feel uneasy and I will feel sorry for the common people in this world. Although Lin Yu has been in this world for a long time, some of the boys' loyalty is still there, and some of the boys' blood can be burned out in the world of Jizhu. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the strong man couldn't help but turn his head and glanced at Lin Yu. There was a bit of coldness in his eyes, and there was a killing intent in his body. Is coming quietly. I'm afraid this little guy doesn't know how powerful my wolf warlock is, and he actually dares to challenge me. I think you, old guy, are really impatient. If I don't show you some color today, I think you don't know the three eyes of Lord Ma. After the strong man finished speaking, he suddenly jumped up. At this time, he waved his hand casually, and the group of mid-level demon wolves behind him all rushed towards Lin Yu. These strange beasts of the wolf clan are not the strange beasts controlled by the wolf warlock at all. In fact, speaking in detail, these strange beasts were just recently locked up by the mad wolf warlock using evil techniques, and their souls were unable to attack. The relationship between them was just that, and it ended here. There was a bit of coldness in the eyes of the mad wolf warlock. At this time, there was a bit of sneer on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's body, with a murderous intention in his body. It began to be released quietly. After Lin Yu saw the mad wolf warlock like this, he couldn't help but half squinted his eyes. There were some complex colors in his eyes, and finally he couldn't help but frown slightly. You bastard, you are just looking for death. Since you want to die, it would be hard to explain if you don't succeed this time. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he waved his hand suddenly, and then a violent force suddenly poured out. That violent force made people a little confused. Unknown feeling. The surrounding world feels even more desolate and majestic. The world between heaven and earth is gradually churning and surging. In just a brief moment, just in this breath, the surrounding world is filled with a feeling of wolf claws treading the ground. Sound. The sky and the earth were dark, and the majestic feeling made people feel a bit indescribable. For a moment, the sky and the earth changed color. At this moment, Lin Yu did not directly summon the space-time beast, because he knew the space-time beast too well. Facing these wolf beasts, it was simply killing a chicken with a butcher knife. At this time, Lin Yu had a playful smile on his lips, and he uttered three words lightly. Earth-shaking bear. When the earth-shaking bear appeared, the earth-shaking bear waved its 10-foot fist and suddenly slapped it towards the wolf pack. These poor wolf beasts, one after another, were completely crushed by the space-time beast like crushing flies one after another. A bloody smell spread. After Lin Yu smelled the pungent bloody smell, a few complex colors flashed in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 93. Those monsters, wolves, and beasts, watching countless of their companions die at the hands of this man, looked at them with a bit of fear, and then they raised their eyebrows humbly. But at this moment, their looks of fear began to become more and more obvious. The earth-shaking bear suddenly took a step forward, and countless demonic wolves and strange beasts suddenly retreated. These monsters, wolves, and beasts have obviously realized the terror and horror of this big man, so they absolutely dare not move forward rashly at this time. These strange beasts of the wolf tribe suddenly rushed forward. Their speed was extremely fast, and in just one breath, they suddenly came to the side of the earth-shaking bear. At this time, those wolf beasts opened their huge mouths and suddenly bit into the neck of the earth-shaking bear. At this moment, the earth-shaking bear let out an angry roar. That roaring sound resounded through the sky. Almost in this breath, just in this movement, a violent force poured out suddenly, and then that wave the violent power spiraled and entangled together. Then the Kenya Wolf King suddenly flew up. His speed was extremely fast. He was in front of the earth-shaking bear in just one breath, and then the Kenya Wolf King suddenly flew up. The Wolf King suddenly opened his mouth. Kenya Wolf King was extremely fast. He was in front of the earth-shaking bear in just one breath. And at this moment, a majestic, vast, ethereal force gradually spiraled out into the void. The muscular man from before just glanced at Lin Yu coldly. You can actually make an enemy of my blood wolf army, but even so, what can you do? Today I will let you see what it means to be truly terrifying. The strength, what is true power? The muscular man gritted his teeth and spoke every word. His words were somewhat cold, and his expression was even more ferocious. But at this moment, Lin Yu didn't care about all this. There was a bit of sneer on the corner of his mouth, and a trace of disdain flashed in his eyes. How powerful Kenya Wolf King can be, maybe he has some ability. But you just have some skills. If you want to trouble me, don't you see if you are worthy or not? Alien Beast, Lord of the Kenya Wolf King's Domain Level 3, Level 38. Qualification, Alien, Elementary. Life, 999999911. Speed, 999999911. Defense, 999999911. Attack, 999999911. Skills, Demon Wolf swallows the moon, Wolf walks the world, Road of the Wolf King, Bloody Full Moon. The Demon Wolf swallows the moon. Kenya Wolf King activates his skills and can swallow the spiritual power of a whole world in one bite. Wolf walking the world, the Kenya Wolf King activates his skills in just a split second. He can suddenly move behind the enemy and deliver a fatal blow, or it can also be used to escape. Way of the Wolf King, the Kenya Wolf King activates his skills to summon an absolute realm. This absolute realm is a realm of the dead. Anyone who steps into this realm will die in an instant. Bloody Full Moon, summons a full moon. This full moon can overlook the world and everything, giving people a sense of shock, and making people feel the power of blood rage in an instant. Lin Yu looked at the Kenya Wolf King, a bit of solemnity flashed in her eyes, and then she couldn't help but frown slightly. At this time, she half squinted her eyes, and a bit of complicated thoughts flashed in her eyes. Color, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly, and a killing intent came over him quietly. Even Lin Yu had to admit that now that he was facing the Kenya Wolf King, he was quite helpless, and even more frightened. Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at the Kenya Wolf King. Although the Kenya Wolf King might not be as good as the Fire Spirit Beast, the horror of the Fire Spirit Beast was indeed something Lin Yu had. A little scared. There were some complex colors in Lin Yu's eyes, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. Why? Why is it like this now? What on earth is going on? What exactly is this Fire Spirit Beast? What's going on? At this time, Lin Yu half squinted his eyes, and then took a deep breath to calm down his mood a little. Then he suddenly took a step forward, and then the electricity in his mouth spit out a few words just like that. Time Beast, come out. Lin Yu's tone was neither urgent nor slow, and his words were quite relaxed. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to have suddenly remembered something. Don't hold back. This big guy's strength is extraordinary. If we hold back, we may be the ones who suffer the most. A bitter smile appeared at the corner of Lin Yu's mouth, and a look of helplessness flashed through his eyes. At this moment, he seemed to have suddenly remembered something, and turned his head towards the space-time beast. Glanced this way. You said that if you forcefully use the ascension pill to open up your meridians and improve your cultivation level, will your current strength advance by leaps and bounds to the level of the master of this field? At this time, after the space-time beast heard what Lin Yu said, a few excitement flashed in his eyes. If there is a spirit-raising pill, I have 90% now, which can improve my strength by more than half, so this spirit-raising pill is feasible. At this moment, after Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, a few excitement flashed in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly, and a few excited smiles appeared at the corners of his mouth. In this case, it would be great. If you have reached the level of the master of this domain now, I would like to see which other little people dare to act wild in front of me. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly stepped forward, and then his mind moved, and he entered the mall of the system. Sniper kills the Night Wolf King, reward points of 1 million, and a spirit-raising pill. Facing this interface that has not appeared for a long time, this paragraph of text popped up here, and Lin Yu was naturally very excited in his heart. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 94. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly remembered that he might be able to use his points to exchange for a spiritual elixir. At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to have suddenly remembered something. A teasing smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and a bit of satisfaction flashed in his eyes, and then just like this he nodded slightly. Yes, this time it's really good. Lin Yu's eyes were full of excitement, and then he nodded lightly. At this time, he suddenly took a step forward, then turned his head and moved towards Shikan. Glancing here, there was a somewhat helpless look in his eyes. When the time and space beast saw Lin Yu like this, he couldn't help but frown slightly. Looking at your look, I knew something bad was going to happen. What do you want? Say it quickly. The space-time beast's eyes were staring at Lin Yu, and at this time, Lin Yu couldn't help but smile like this, with some complicated colors in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to have suddenly discovered something. He suddenly took a step forward, and then glanced towards the space-time beast. Do you think you can deal with this guy with your current strength? If you think you can, let's not play a big one this time. Lin Yu turned his head and stared directly at time and space as me. At this moment, he seemed to have suddenly remembered something, and then he raised his eyebrows slightly. No, there seems to be something wrong with this. After everyone heard what Lin Yu said, they looked over at Lin Yu, with complicated colors seeming to flash in their eyes. The space-time beast also frowned slightly. He turned his head and stared directly at Lin Yu, with some complicated colors flashing in his eyes. Tell me first, what exactly do you want to do? I'm very curious. The space-time beast's gaze was as bright as a torch, and at this moment, Lin Yu seemed to have remembered something. He turned his head and glanced at the space-time beast, with a teasing smile on his lips. How about fighting against the Night Wolf King with your current strength? I believe that with your current strength, you can definitely do it. Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at the space-time beast, with a hint of amusement flashing in his eyes, and a smile on the corner of his mouth. At this time, when the time and space beast heard what Lin Yu said, he couldn't help but narrowed his eyes. He glanced at Lin Yu angrily. If you want me to die, just say it directly, why bother to make things like this? After the time and space beast finished speaking, his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, with a complicated look in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu had a teasing smile on his lips. I believe in your strength, and I also believe you can do it, so you must work hard. The space-time beast rolled its eyes at Lin Yu angrily, and a trace of complexity seemed to flash in his eyes. At this time, the space-time beast was also on the verge of crying, without tears. Lin Yu couldn't help laughing at that time, with a playful look in his eyes. But after a while, Lin Yu's face returned to its original normal look. He turned his head and glanced at the space-time beast, and then took a deep breath and breathed a little. Calm down your mood. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly remember something. He raised his eyebrows slightly, and a few complicated colors flashed in his eyes. A moment later, Lin Yu also took a deep breath. In one breath, he spent 1,000,000 points from the system mall to redeem a spell. Actually, you don't have to worry. I have a talisman here that can temporarily give you the strength of a domain lord level beast. You can go to the lobby with your own strength for a while. If you really can't beat it in the end, you don't worry at all, because I'm here. Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at the space-time beast in front of him. There were some complex colors in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. At this time, the space-time beast seemed to have remembered something. At this moment, he half squinted his eyes, and a somewhat complicated light flashed in his eyes. The light looked a bit beautiful. How about it? Do you agree to the condition I mentioned or not? At this time, the space-time beast couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded slightly. Okay, of course I can promise you. After all, I believe you will not completely put me in such a dangerous situation. I believe you. There was quite a bit of determination in the eyes of the space-time beast, and at this moment, Lin Yu just smiled like this, with a bit of evil charm flashing in his eyes. After a while, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly remember something. He moved forward so gently, and uttered 4 words in one mouth: confinement of time and space. At this time, the space-time beast suddenly activated its skills, and at this time, the Kanyi Wolf King suddenly felt that the space around him seemed to be completely frozen. At this time, his expression suddenly changed. The Kanyi Wolf King looked ugly, frowning slightly, and a look of disbelief flashed in his eyes. At this moment, Kanyi Wolf King's pupils suddenly enlarged, and after seeing this scene, the strong man on the side couldn't help but shook his head slightly. How is this possible? How can this guy be so strong? This is absolutely impossible, this is absolutely impossible. At this moment, after Lin Yu saw the scene from the side, there was a bit of sneer on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of contempt and ridicule. I originally thought that you, a domain lord level alien beast, could still have some abilities, but now it seems that it is nothing more than that. A domain lord level alien beast, but it doesn't seem to be a big deal. At this time, after the strong man heard what Lin Yu said, he was furious. His eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's murderous intention, and it began to gradually emerge. Several flashes flashed in his eyes. Very cold. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 95. At this time, Lin Yu had a playful smile on his face, and a hint of mockery flashed in his eyes. The killing intent in his body began to attack quietly. After a moment, he suddenly stood up and rushed towards one side at a very fast speed. Everyone's eyes flashed with disbelief. They couldn't understand why Lin Yu was so brave and dared to take risks alone. At this time, their eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. After this moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly remember something. His eyes flashed with excitement, and then he raised his eyebrows slightly. Finally, the space-time beast behind him suddenly jumped up and rushed forward quickly. The speed of the space beast was extremely fast. It arrived in front of the remnant Night Wolf King in just one breath. At this time, the space beast opened its bloody mouth and suddenly bit the remnant Night Wolf King. A sharp sound passed by. After that sharp sound, the space confinement that Kong Shao had previously placed was actually torn apart by the remnant Night Wolf King. A wolf howl resounded through the sky from the mouth of the remnant Night Wolf King, and then the space around it was faintly trembling. A violent force rushed out of the void, and the surrounding world seemed to be boiling. The two sides collided with each other, and then around them, a surging force made everyone tremble. The strong man before just glanced at Lin Yu coldly, with a sarcastic smile on his lips, and a hint of contempt and provocation flashed in his eyes. The corner of the man's mouth curled up a bit of sneer, his eyes were full of disdain and mockery. At this time, he couldn't help but spread his hands and shook his head. Originally, I thought you might have some skills, but now it seems that you are just so-so, just some tricks. If you are really capable now, you can come and hit me. After hearing what the man said, Lin Yu was also furious. At this time, he suddenly jumped up and rushed towards the man. He turned around and kicked the man in the chest without saying a word. After the man suddenly retreated several steps in a row, he barely stabilized his body. At this time, Lin Yu stared at the man with his eyes, and a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes. A cold killing intent began to emerge quietly. At this moment, the man just wanted to control the Night Wolf King, but for some reason, Lin Yu rushed towards him like crazy. The man was beaten by Lin Yu and retreated step by step, with an indescribable fear in his eyes. At this time, the man suddenly took a few steps back, and then a little fear flashed in his eyes, and finally frowned slightly, and a few complex colors flashed in his eyes, and the cold aura on his body quietly emerged. And just after this moment, the Dark Night Wolf King suddenly stepped forward. At this time, the Dark Night Wolf King roared, and the man also uttered a few words from his mouth. Demon Wolf swallows the moon. And at this time, a whistle just wanted to come, and then the Dark Night Wolf King suddenly stepped forward, and the surrounding heaven and earth couldn't help but tremble. The surrounding world seemed to have been attacked violently. It began to tremble suddenly. The violent trembling of the world made everyone feel an inexplicable fear. Between the world, it began to rush out suddenly, giving people an indescribable sense of fear. But at this moment, the violent trembling began to become more violent than before, and a domineering and strong force began to appear in the surrounding world. It made people feel indescribable, mysterious, and seemed to make people feel a little bit difficult to describe. This feeling was quite bad, and people's minds suddenly trembled violently. The spiritual power around began to be absorbed crazily by the demon wolf. The demon wolf's face gradually became ferocious, and a few indescribable feelings flashed in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu felt the spiritual power around her, which suddenly gathered towards that place, and her face suddenly became ugly. At this time, her eyes could not help but show a bit of solemnity. Then she couldn't help but frown slightly, and a strange light flashed in her eyes. There seemed to be a little sadness between her eyebrows, which made people feel a little emotional. But at this time, in the surrounding world, there were some signs of collapse. But just after this moment, that strange power suddenly began to spread, and this power made everyone's heart tremble, and everyone's eyes flashed with some inexplicable fear. Lin Yu suddenly stepped forward again, and the murderous intent on his body began to gradually leak out. The cold momentum made everyone's eyes flash with some inexplicable fear. At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly remember something. At this time, he couldn't help but shake his head and smile. It looks quite bluffing, but in fact it's just like that. It's just garbage among garbage. I really don't understand how you have the nerve to take it out and embarrass yourself. Lin Yu's tone was neither fast nor slow, and there was a bit of contempt in his eyes. The murderous intent on his body began to gradually reveal itself, and then the surging power suddenly emerged. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 96. At this time, there was also a period of turmoil between heaven and earth. Just like this, a very powerful force spurted out. That powerful force began to emerge slowly, little by little. A mysterious force suddenly emerged from the surrounding area. In this area of heaven and earth, that force instantly erupted into a fatal panic. Immediately afterwards, the time and space beast felt that he did not have enough spiritual power to support it, so his face began to gradually become pale and ugly. At this time, some complex colors flashed in the eyes of the space-time beast, and then he couldn't help but shook his head. He couldn't help but frown slightly, and then suddenly stepped forward. One step forward. The step of the time and space beast directly shook the surrounding world, and in this slow shaking, the time and space beast seemed to feel the terror of this world. After all, it is still an alien beast at the level of a domain lord. The powerful and arrogant power it erupts makes people feel a little bit scared. The violent and fierce power suddenly bursts out. It swept out in a moment, and then immediately after this moment, the body of the space-time beast suddenly took several steps back before it could barely stabilize its figure. At this time, the space-time beast glanced at Lin Yu, a bit of panic seemed to flash in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. If it continues like this now, then I'm afraid, our end will be very tragic when the time comes. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, a somewhat complicated light flashed in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. The surrounding world began to suddenly change. Trembled violently. And just after this moment, the space beast seemed to remember something, and there were some extremely complicated colors in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. The surrounding world trembled for a while. In this violent trembling, the body of the space-time beast suddenly moved forward. He just took a step forward so gently. Although it was just the step, the surroundings, the space actually seemed to be about to split open in an instant. At this time, Lin Yu did not give any instructions to the space-time beast, and everything depended on the space-time beast itself to see what the situation was like. But even so, the power burst out by the space beast should not be underestimated. The powerful combat power directly knocked down the Kenya Wolf King completely. At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to have suddenly remembered something. A teasing smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and a hint of amusement flashed in his eyes. It seems that the Kenya Wolf King is nothing more than this. If this continues, then I'm afraid it won't take too much time to completely defeat the Kenya Wolf King. But at this moment, the bald man didn't seem to care about all this at all. A somewhat playful smile appeared on the corner of the bald man's mouth, and there was a hint of playfulness in his eyes. At this time, the bald man couldn't help but nodded slightly. Interesting, it is indeed a top-notch alien qualification, and it is also an alien beast of this time and space level. This is perfect, and things seem to be starting to get interesting. When the bald man thought of this, he softly uttered a few words, "Wolves roam the world." After the bald man said these 4 words, Kenya Wolf King, who was originally lying on the ground and imprisoned, actually disappeared in front of everyone, and then everyone felt a burst of energy around him. Trembling, after this moment, everyone suddenly disappeared. The bald man's mouth raised a bit of a joking smile, and a bit of satisfaction flashed in his eyes. At this time, he nodded slightly, "Not bad, it's really interesting. It's just that it's a pity that this little beast of yours is probably going to be a snake here today." After the bald man finished speaking, he suddenly activated the skill, and then the surrounding world began to tremble violently. After a moment, everyone's expression suddenly sank. After seeing the scene in the distance, Master Zi-Ling couldn't help but half squinted his eyes. He frowned slightly, and there were some complex colors in his eyes. "Great Elder, looking at this situation, I'm afraid." Master Zi-Ling turned his head and glanced towards the Great Elder. Some complex colors flashed in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but raised his eyebrows slightly, and something strange flashed in his eyes. And after this moment, the Master Zi-Ling suddenly stepped forward, and finally a mysterious power emanated from the body of the Master Zi-Ling. Although the old beggar on the side did not take action, when he saw the real Zi-Ling preparing to take action, he was so satisfied at the time. He nodded, a bit of joking flashed in his eyes, and a playful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Interesting, wouldn't things like this become interesting now? The old beggar would like to see how you want to respond now. There was a bit of joking in the old beggar's eyes, and then he nodded with satisfaction. At this time, the old beggar seemed to have suddenly remembered something, and he half squinted. And a moment later, a person suddenly rushed out. Who else could that person be if he wasn't Master Zi Ling? The sound of the three-clawed king dragon resounded through the sky. At this time, after seeing this scene, the previously calm bald man's pupils suddenly enlarged, and a bit of disbelief flashed in his eyes. The bald man's fists were clenched, and he was gnashing his teeth at this moment. Asshole, this bastard actually dares to take advantage of others' danger and do such a shameless thing while I'm fighting. He really has the face. The bald man let out such a roar, and at this moment, the corner of Zi Ling's mouth was slightly sneered, and a hint of amusement flashed in Zi Ling's eyes. Then he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 97. At this time, the corners of Zi Ling Genren's mouth curled up a bit of sarcastic smile, and a trace of contempt flashed in his eyes. He stared at the bald man and said, whether it is despicable or not is not up to you. The strong have their passes, and the despicable have their epitaphs. At this time, the bald man's pupils suddenly enlarged after hearing what Zi Ling Genren said, and a look of disbelief flashed in his eyes. I didn't expect you to say such a thing, it's really not easy. Zi Ling Genren's mouth curled up a trace of sneer. What's not easy? I want to listen, you say it? As a dignified head, you can actually say such shameless words, aren't you afraid that your subordinates will not accept you? The bald man stared at Master Zi Ling with a cold light in his eyes. At this time, Master Zi Ling waved his hand with disdain. I don't think there is anything wrong with this matter. They won't care about it at all. Master Zi Ling said it lightly, and the bald man's eyes flashed with a cold light. In this case, I really admire you. Master Zi Ling just smiled slightly. In this case, I don't think you need to admire me. After all, I don't need the admiration of a dead person. The three-clawed dragon roared, and then suddenly wrapped around the Night Wolf King, who was instantly imprisoned by the three-clawed dragon. The dragon clan is the natural king among the beasts. The Night Wolf King felt a sense of fear in his heart after seeing the three-clawed dragon. He called the Night Wolf King and did not dare to move at all. The bald man saw that this was not a solution, so he gritted his teeth, formed a mysterious and obscure seal with his hands, and lightly tapped the Night Wolf King's forehead. Blood full moon. At this moment, a huge new moon suddenly appeared in the void. The new moon hanging in the void made everyone's mind shaken. In the void, the vast and endless pressure from the new moon made everyone's expression suddenly become ugly. The remnant Night Wolf King took advantage of this opportunity to suddenly break free from the control of the three-clawed dragon and bit the three-clawed dragon. The three-clawed dragon let out a dragon roar, and the surrounding world was shaken. At this time, the Purple Spirit Master was about to launch a special skill, and Lin Yu suddenly moved. You must know that the task has not been completed yet. Lin Yu must deal with the remnant Night Wolf King himself, and the task will be counted. So at this time, Lin Yu uttered a few words lightly, time and spaced here. Because the Night Wolf King used this last skill, the power was really terrifying, so in the turmoil of the surrounding world, it was indeed a bit unpredictable. At this moment, Lin Yu's face suddenly condensed, and the coldness in his eyes gradually became obvious. He suddenly took a step forward, and then the Night Wolf King was instantly completely crushed by the powerful force of time and space. At this moment, Lin Yu's mouth corners were raised with a playful smile, and a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes. He suddenly took a step forward, and then the surrounding world suddenly began to be so agitated. There was a landslide around, and it seemed as if it was about to fall into this world. Like the end of the world, he did not expect that after such a short time, the space-time beast would become so powerful. Lin Yu half closed his eyes, and at this time, he could not help but frown slightly, with a strange look in his eyes, and the murderous intent on his body began to gradually reveal itself. At this moment, the bald man's pupils suddenly enlarged, and a solemn look flashed in his eyes. The bald man frowned slightly, and then he just felt a sweet mouthful of blood in his chest, and it spurted out directly. The bald man's figure suddenly retreated backwards, and it was not easy to stabilize his figure. His eyes were staring at Lin Yu, and a few unbelievable expressions flashed in his pupils. How is it possible? How could your strength be so terrible? This is absolutely impossible, this is absolutely impossible. The bald man was already a little hysterical. Lin Yu stared at him straight, a playful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and a bit of amusement flashed in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu heard the system in his mind, and the elegant female voice came, "Congratulations to the host for completing the task, reward points of 1 million points, and an upgrade pill." At this time, Lin Yu suddenly had 1 million points, and then a small white jade porcelain bottle suddenly appeared in his hand. Lin Yu took the small white jade porcelain bottle and began to look at it carefully, and then nodded with satisfaction. But at this moment, a majestic and vast force rushed directly towards them. When they felt this majestic and vast power, Lin Yu's expression suddenly flashed in his eyes. It was unbelievable, and then his pupils suddenly enlarged. At this time, Lin Yu couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly, a few complex colors flashed in his eyes, and then he shook his head. "No, it shouldn't be, why is it like this, what's going on?" When Lin Yu thought of this, he couldn't help but half squinted his eyes, and then he frowned slightly. At this moment, Master Zi Ling seemed to have suddenly discovered something. His expression changed drastically, and a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes. Then the roiling power in his body suddenly appeared. Plundered out wildly. Master Zi Ling made a hand with his hands and recited a mantra. After a moment, a majestic and vast power emitted from his palms. This majestic and vast power moved toward the void, slowly gathering. Just between exhaling and inhaling, it gives people an extremely indescribable feeling. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly moved forward and dodged. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 98. How dare you hurt my disciple? I think you are really brave. Master Zi Ling's face suddenly darkened, and he half squinted his eyes at this time. Interesting, it's really interesting. I didn't expect that the Wuji sect really spent a lot of money this time, even for such a person. I sent it out, and it was really interesting. After Master Zi Ling finished speaking, he suddenly stepped forward. The three-clawed king dragon hovered above his head. The three-clawed king dragon spit out scorching dragon breath from its mouth. This scorching dragon breath blew through the surrounding area. The mountains, rivers, and trees give people a mysterious feeling. Immediately afterwards, everyone saw only one old man. The old man stood high in the void, looking down at the world, and arrogant among the heroes, which made people feel a little inexplicable. Little guy, even I have to admit that you are indeed somewhat capable, but so what? If I want to do something to you, why would it be so troublesome? The old man suddenly took a step forward, and then followed the mountains and rivers, and couldn't help but tremble slightly. The old man's eyes were fixed on Genren Zi Ling, and with such a wave of his hand, a great power came. It spread out from his cuffs. That fierce and domineering power made the whole person feel an inexplicable fear. After the three-clawed king dragon felt the power of the old man, it suddenly began to spiral into a ball. At this time, he actually started to tremble. Just in this moment, the man suddenly took a step forward, and then in this moment, the guy's face began to change suddenly, and his eyes seemed to be a little complicated. Oops, I'm afraid something is really bad. Master Ling glanced at the Great Elder. The Great Elder frowned slightly, and a bit of complexity flashed in his eyes. I am afraid that this old guy came with desperate determination this time. If so, I'm afraid we may not be his opponents. It's hard to say now. The Great Elder glanced at Master Ling, with a wry smile on his lips, and a hint of helplessness in his eyes. At this moment, Master Ling frowned slightly, and an ominous premonition suddenly appeared in his heart. He suddenly flew forward, and then made a hand seal with his hands. The universe between heaven and earth begins with Wuji, and everything returns to Wanfa. The third elder Taizhang raised a sneer at the corner of his mouth. You are just controlling the beasts. To me, it is simply not worth mentioning. Don't forget, what our Wuji sect is good at is to control the beasts. We are one, so what can you do to fight me? There was quite a bit of ridicule in the words of the third supreme elder. When Master Ling saw this third supreme elder, after saying this, he was furious and furious. His eyes were straight. He was staring at the third elder Taizhang. Don't be like this. Do you think we really can't deal with you? It's ridiculous to say that. If we want to kill you, it will be even easier. The third elder Taizhang stared at Master Ling with his eyes. A bit of coldness flashed in his eyes. He suddenly jumped forward and took a step forward, and then quickly came to the front of Master Ling. His big hand, with a wave of his hand, the overwhelming power suddenly enveloped the real person Ling. At this time, Master Ling frowned slightly, and a somewhat ominous premonition suddenly emerged in his heart. The three-clawed king dragon blocked the front of Master Ling, but at this moment, Master Ling was unable to do anything to Taishang-san. The elder didn't take a moment, and his whole body suddenly flew backwards. In the end, Master Ling fell heavily to the ground. He felt his chest surge, and the last mouthful of blood spurted out. The blood color of that mouthful of blood was exceptionally bright, and the aura of Master Ling became extremely weak at this moment. He slowly struggled to stand up, his eyes fixed on the third elder Taizhang. You actually forcibly fused the power of a strange beast. Do you know that this is an act that defies heaven? You will not end well. I swear you will never end well. Master Ling spurted a mouthful of blood, and the three-clawed king dragon was severely injured. After being severely injured, the three-clawed king dragon retreated back into the body of Master Ling. The third elder Taizhang suddenly took a step forward, and then came directly in front of Master Ling. His eyes were fixed on Master Ling, and finally he stepped on Master Ling's chest. You are what kind of thing? You dare to yell at me? If I want to kill you, it will be like crushing an ant. At this time, the Great Elder suddenly summoned the fire spirit beast. The third elder looked at the Great Elder coldly, with a cold light flashing in his eyes. The murderous intention is clearly revealed. You bastard, how dare you do this? Let's see if I don't kill you. The third elder Taizhang made a hand seal, and then the phantom of the divine dragon suddenly appeared in front of him. However, the divine dragon looked a bit weird, because there were actually two wings on the back of the divine dragon. Between the divine dragons, they flew up and down and moved left and right. The vast and boundless power directly made the fire spirit beast subconsciously take a few steps back. The Great Elder's face began to look ugly. How is this possible for the 9th level dragon spirit, the master of the domain? How can he be so tyrannical? At this moment, Lin Yu turned around and glanced at the elder, with a solemn look in his eyes. Elder, can you hold out for 3 incense sticks? After hearing what Lin Yu said, the elder smiled bitterly, and his eyes flashed with helplessness. 3 incense sticks may be a bit long. Now I don't know if I can hold out for 3 incense sticks. In my opinion, it may be a bit difficult. Lin Yu frowned slightly, and his eyes were complicated. What should I do now? If I can't hold out for 3 incense sticks, I'm afraid I can't. The elder half closed his eyes, and after thinking for a moment, he seemed to have made up his mind. Well, I have an idea, but I don't know if you are willing to use it. Lin Yu nodded slightly. What idea? You say. The elder lowered his head and whispered a few words in Lin Yu's ear. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 99. Lin Yu's expression suddenly brightened. Is this true? The great elder nodded slightly. It is absolutely true, and there is absolutely no falsehood. At this time, Lin Yu had a slight chuckle on his lips, and a trace of excitement flashed in his eyes. It's really good to have more in this way, it's simply wonderful. That's true, but things are not like that right now. Many things still have to be determined by God's will. If something goes wrong, then I'm afraid. The great elder also frowned slightly, but after a moment he smiled like this. It's all up to you now, and you are responsible for everything, don't worry. You can rest assured, but... Of course, the great elder could tell that Lin Yu was quite confused at this moment. At this time, the third elder suddenly waved his hand, and the dragon spirit suddenly started to move towards the great elder. Coming here violently. The great elder pushed Lin Yu away and gave half of his strength to Lin Yu. In this case, if it originally took 3 sticks of incense to break through, it would probably only take 1.5 sticks to break through now. But the price of dividing this half of the power is that the strength of the fire spirit beast is greatly reduced, so at this moment, the body of the great elder begins to become much weaker than before. The divine dragon spirit suddenly rushed toward the great elder. The great elder felt his chest churn. He forced the fire beast to block the divine dragon spirit. But how could this fire spirit beast be able to block the dragon spirit so easily? The figure of the dragon spirit suddenly became illusory. In just this moment, the entire body of the dragon spirit it began to suddenly become bleak and gloomy. The fire spirit beast spit out a mouthful of divine fire, but because its strength was not as strong as before, the trauma suffered by the divine dragon spirit was actually not too great. At this moment, the fire spirit beast suddenly took a step forward, but the dragon spirit actually wrapped directly around the fire spirit beast. In just this moment, the fire spirit beast actually started to become gloomy little by little. A mouthful of blood suddenly spurted out, the fire spirit beast's expression suddenly sank, and the power around it began to slowly dim. The fire spirit beast was struggling to support itself. At this moment, Lin Yu, without saying a word, directly fed the life elixir to the time and space beast. After the time and space beast swallowed the life elixir, its aura began to surge, because there was a big due to the elder's spiritual power. The space beast's aura was rising steadily at this time. After seeing this scene, the third elder Taizhang had a slight sneer on his lips, a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes, and the murderous intent on his body began to gradually emerge. It's interesting. It's really interesting. This little kid does seem to have some abilities, but he's far from it. He's far from it. After the third elder Taizhang finished speaking, he suddenly rushed out. His speed was extremely fast, and then he grabbed Lin Yu directly. Lin Yu looked shocked when the third elder Taizhang grabbed him, his pupils suddenly enlarged, and a bit of disbelief flashed in his eyes. He subconsciously took a few steps back. But no matter how he retreated, the third elder was just like the maggot attached to the bone, and had no intention of letting him go. At this moment, the space-time beast is at this critical juncture. If the space-time beast breaks through, after all, it is also a top-level qualified space-time beast. This strength must be extraordinary, and maybe it can be compared with the 3 elders of Taizhang. The power of a battle. But if he can't break through, as far as the current space-time beast is concerned, his strength will not be able to compete head-on with the three Taizhang elders. After Lin Yu thought of this, a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and a look of helplessness flashed in his eyes. How is it possible? Why is it like this? But just when the fist of the third elder was about to fall on Lin Yu, a dragon's roar spread throughout the world, and then a shadow suddenly appeared in front of Lin Yu. Then immediately after the sound of dragon roar, a giant dragon directly knocked down the third elder. The body of the third elder suddenly began to retreat backwards, and his face began to gradually change. He looked ugly, and his eyes seemed a bit cold. After the third elder Taizhang saw this scene, he slowly got up, then slowly turned his head and glanced towards Genren Ziling, and then the corners of his mouth curled up. He sneered, his eyes just staring at Genren Ziling, and the murderous intention on his body was fully revealed. Asshole, I'm going to kill you. You will definitely regret what you did. I can swear to you. At this time, the third elder Taizhang was gnashing his teeth every word. At this time, the corner of Ziling's mouth raised a sneer, kill me? Okay, I'm here now, if you want to do it, come anyway, I'm just afraid that you don't have the ability to kill me. Master Ziling laughed loudly, with a bit of contempt and ridicule in his eyes. At this time, the third elder Taizhang had completely swallowed up all his reason by the anger in his heart. The third elder suddenly jumped up, and then rushed towards Ziling Genren. His speed was so fast that he arrived in front of Ziling Genren in just a blink of an eye. Then, without saying a word, he punched Ziling Genren's chest. Ziling Genren flew backwards and fell heavily to the ground. He spit out blood and his eyes were full of unwillingness. How is it possible? How can your strength be so terrible? This is impossible, this is impossible. At this moment, the third elder of the Supremes was already a little hysterical. He suddenly stepped forward, and then punched him hard, hitting him directly on the chest. A mouthful of blood spurted out of the mouth of the third Grand Elder. Now it was his turn to be shocked. Master Ziling's eyes were fixed on the third Grand Elder. However, the third Grand Elder did not realize that Master Ziling had already used all his strength. He looked a little scary and his face looked a little ferocious. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 100. Ha ha ha, okay, little guy, I think you have some skills. I didn't expect that you have been playing with eagles all year round, and now you are pecked by this eagle. But even so, what can you do? If I want to kill you today how can you escape? The third elder Taizhang flew forward directly, and then stepped forward. Without saying a word, he just kicked Master Ziling in the chest. At this time, the aura on the space-time beast was still increasing violently. That powerful aura gave everyone a feeling of fear. After everyone felt this aura, their faces couldn't help but become ugly at the same time. The same was true for the third elder Taizhang. He looked at the space-time beast in front of him, and his pupils suddenly enlarged. Oops, I fell into a trap. I didn't expect these nasty little guys to be here plotting against me. Damn it! The third elder Taizhang was gnashing his teeth like this. A bit of coldness flashed in his eyes, and the murderous intention in his body gradually began to emerge. After a moment, the third elder Taizhang suddenly jumped up, and then came to the front of Master Ziling. The third elder Taizhang grabbed the collar of Master Ziling and suddenly swung it forward. Master Ziling's body was like a cannonball, hitting Lin Yu's body. Lin Yu was stunned by this sudden attack. At this time, he couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva, and his eyes were quite frightened. The spiritual power that Master Ziling carries around him, if he really hits him, then I am afraid that even if he is not dead, he will end up crippled. But if he really escapes, Master Ziling may not die this time, but will also be seriously injured. However, the space-time beast has not yet completely broken through, and Lin Yu was also caught in a tangle for a while. After a moment, Lin Yu seemed to have made up his mind. He turned sideways suddenly, and then the space-time beast roared, and the roar was heard. While the world was trembling, Lin Yu's brows gradually relaxed. At this critical moment, Lin Yu made a desperate move. He shared all his power with the space-time beast without reservation. Perhaps it was precisely because of this that the space-time beast was able to force such a breakthrough. It's really quite good. At this time, Lin Yu had a teasing smile on his lips. He was also so satisfied and nodded. All of this was linked to each other. And after this moment, a figure suddenly rushed out. The figure was extremely fast. Who else could it be if it wasn't the third elder? After the third elder saw the scene in front of him, a bit of coldness flashed in his eyes, and a murderous intention gradually spread in his body, but after a moment, he suddenly smiled like this. The third elder's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, with a bit of contempt flashing in his eyes. Little guy, although I have to admit that your strength is indeed not weak, but even so, what can I do? If I want to kill you, it will be easy without any effort. When Lin Yu heard what the third elder said, a slight sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of ridicule. You want to kill me? Ha ha ha, that's good, I want to see it today. What qualifications do you have to kill me now? After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward. His speed was not slow. With just this step, he was already behind the three elders. At this time, the space-time beast has been promoted to the level of the domain lord. After being promoted to this level, both speed and strength will be greatly improved compared to before, and perhaps it is because of the mutual understanding between the space-time Shao and Lin Yu. At this moment, Lin Yu could actually mobilize the power of the space-time beast with ease, which was quite unexpected by Lin Yu. After Lin Yu thought of this, a bit of amusement flashed in his eyes, and a playful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Perhaps because of this, the third elder actually had a rare look of solemnity on his face. The third elder shook his head crazily. Impossible, this is absolutely impossible. How could your strength be so terrifying? How could it be like this? Lin Yu suddenly smiled, with a bit of joking in his eyes. Why is it impossible? Come to think of it, you can't blame anyone else for this, but blame yourself for being a waste. When Lin Yu finished speaking, the third elder suddenly took a few steps back, his eyes staring at Lin Yu. After a moment, he suddenly laughed like this. Ha 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 ha, it's interesting, it's really interesting, little guy, I admire you, you dare to challenge me like this, but you will regret it. After the third elder Taizhang finished speaking, he suddenly stepped out sideways, and then the spirit of the divine dragon penetrated directly through the body of the third elder Taizhang and hit Lin Yu. Even Lin Yu was unexpected by the situation in front of him. There was a bit of disbelief in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. How is it possible? This dragon spirit is actually not an entity. This is an undead level beast. When Lin Yu thought of this, his face suddenly became ugly, his eyebrows seemed to be twisted together, and the corners of his mouth even raised a bitter smile. In this case, what should I do? The spirit of the dragon, the spirit of the dragon. Lin Yu suddenly stepped forward, and then a strong and domineering power swirled out of his body. That strong and domineering power made everyone's mind condense. That strong and domineering power suddenly poured out in front, and then the dragon pierced Lin Yu's body, making him feel a surge in his chest. After a moment, a mouthful of blood spurted out directly. Lin Yu's face turned pale at that moment, with a look of disbelief in his eyes. At this moment, he tried his best to calm the surging blood in his chest. There was a bit of unwillingness and surprise in his eyes, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly.